the Atlantic Ocean does not just take lives, sometimes it swallows them whole, leaving nothing but a lingering silence and a collection of questions that time refuses to answer. If you travel to the far reaches of the Outer Hebrides, off the rugged west coast of Scotland, you will find a cluster of tiny, jagged rocks known as the Flannan Isles. Sailors call them the Seven Hunters. They are lonely, wind-battered, and draped in ancient folklore that stretches back centuries. But it is the largest of these islands, Eilean Mòr, that holds the darkest secret in maritime history. This is the story of 3 men who stepped onto a rock and simply vanished into thin air. The year was 1900, a time when the world was lit by flame and guided by the stars. Life for a lighthouse keeper was one of brutal isolation, governed by the rhythm of the tides and the strict ticking of the clock. On Eilean Mòr, a brand new lighthouse had been built to guide ships through the treacherous, foam-flecked waters of the North Atlantic. It was a marvel of Victorian engineering, standing tall against the elements. 3 men were stationed there to tend to its massive lens. James Ducat, the principal keeper, a seasoned veteran of 20 years, Thomas Marshall, the second assistant, and Donald MacArthur, a working man, filling in for a colleague who had fallen ill. These were not men prone to flights of fancy or nerves. They were disciplined, hardy Scotsmen who understood the sea and its moods. Their job was simple, yet vital. Keep the light burning, keep the lenses polished, and keep the logbook updated with every shift. But on the night of December 15, 1900, the light went out. A passing steamer, the Arctur, reported that the beacon was dark, a terrifying prospect for any vessel navigating those rocky shores. However, due to administrative delays and a massive, real-world storm that rolled in shortly after the report, it took 11 days for a relief ship to reach the island. On December 26th, Boxing Day, the lighthouse tender Hesperus finally cut through the gray, heavy swells toward Eilean Mòr. As the Hesperus approached, the crew noticed something was deeply wrong. Usually, the arrival of the relief ship was a cause for celebration, a break in the monotonous solitude. The keepers would have the flag flying, the landing stage cleared of debris, and they would be waiting at the dock to receive their mail, fresh water, and news from the mainland. Instead, the island was dead. There was no flag, no greeting, just the sound of waves smashing against the cliffs and the cries of gulls circling overhead. Captain Harvey of the Hesperus blew the ship's whistle and fired a flare into the leaden sky. The sound echoed off the rocks, but nothing moved. Joseph Moore, the relief keeper who was supposed to take over a shift that day, was sent ashore alone in a small boat. As Moore climbed the steep, winding stairs carved into the cliffside, he felt a crushing sense of dread that he later struggled to put into words. He reached the lighthouse compound and found the gate and the main door closed. He stepped inside and called out the names of his friends, but his voice only bounced off the cold stone walls. He walked into the kitchen and stopped. On the table, he saw a meal of salted fish and potatoes that had been prepared but never finished. A chair lay overturned on the floor, as if someone had jumped up in a desperate, sudden hurry. The clock on the wall had stopped. Moore ran through the rest of the living quarters, his boots echoing in the emptiness. The beds were empty, neatly made. The lamps were trimmed and ready, but cold. He checked the oilskin coats. 2 were missing, but 1 remained on its hook. Why would one man go out into a freezing Atlantic December without his heavy protective coat? Moore rushed back to the ship to report his findings, and Captain Harvey sent a search party back onto the island. They scoured every inch of Eilean Mòr, looking for any sign of a struggle, a fall, or a body washed up on the rocks. They found nothing. However, they did find the logbook, and that is where the mystery turns from a tragic accident into a haunting enigma. According to the entries written by Thomas Marshall, the weather in the days leading up to the disappearance was unlike anything he had ever seen. On December 12th, he wrote, "Severe gale. Sea lashed to fury. Never seen such a storm." He noted that James Ducat, a man known for his stoic, unbreakable nature, was unusually quiet. More disturbingly, he wrote that the third man, Donald MacArthur, a tough, old seafarer who had survived countless storms at sea, was crying. The entry for December 13th continued in the same vein. The men were praying. They were huddled together, terrified of the wind howling outside. The final entry was written on the morning of December 15th. It read, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all." Here is the problem that has haunted researchers for over a century. There was no storm. Weather reports from nearby coastal stations and ships in the area confirmed that between December 12th and December 15th, the weather around the Flannan Isles was clear and the seas were relatively calm. The severe gale Marshall described didn't exist in the physical world. If the men were terrified and crying, what were they actually hearing outside the thick stone walls of the lighthouse? The investigators eventually moved toward the western landing, a jagged part of the island where supplies were hoisted from the sea. What they saw there was terrifying evidence of the ocean's power. Iron railings were twisted like wire. A massive crate of mooring ropes, kept 110 feet above sea level, had been smashed and its contents scattered like straw. A rock weighing over a ton had been dislodged and thrown across the path. The power required to do that was staggering. It suggested a rogue wave, a wall of water so high and so powerful that it could reach the top of the cliffs and sweep everything into the abyss. This became the official theory. It was suggested that two of the men, Marshall and Ducat, had gone down to the landing to secure the equipment. A freak wave approached, and MacArthur, seeing it from the gallery, rushed out without his coat to warn them, only for all three to be dragged into the freezing water. The official explanation satisfies the mind, but it doesn't satisfy the soul. If the sea was calm, according to the final log entry, where did the rogue wave come from? Why were the men crying and praying days before, when the weather was fine? Lighthouse keepers were trained professionals. They knew the dangers of the western landing. They wouldn't have all stood near the edge during a swell. Furthermore, the logic of a veteran keeper like Ducat, allowing all three men to leave the lighthouse at once, breaking strict protocol, is hard to believe. The folklore of the islands offers a different, more shadow-filled perspective. For centuries, locals believed Eilean Mòr was a place where the veil between worlds was thin. It was inhabited by small folk or phantom birds, and it was considered bad luck to spend the night there. Some suggested the men had been driven mad by the isolation, leading to a murder-suicide that ended with all three in the water. Others whispered about a ghost ship that had abducted the crew, or even more fantastical ideas about sea monsters. One of the most chilling theories involves the old legend of the three giant birds of the Flannans. The legend said that if the light ever went out, the ancient spirits of the islands would come to reclaim the rock from the men who dared to build upon it. The Eilean Mòr lighthouse was eventually automated in 1971, meaning no one has to live on that lonely rock anymore. The light still flashes every night, but it is controlled by a computer from hundreds of miles away. The mystery of 1900 remains the ultimate locked room puzzle of the sea. To this day, if you visit the Flannan Isles, the wind still howls through the ruins of the old chapel near the lighthouse. There are no graves for James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, or Donald MacArthur. There are only the waves, the salt, and a logbook that speaks of a storm that never happened. Whatever took those men, it did so in an instant, leaving behind a cold meal, a stopped clock, and a silence that has lasted over 100 years.